Once, there was a North American indigenous flute player sitting by the river with his friend Raccoon, whistling for the voiceless. Let's talk about wildlife displacement and how it's a legacy of colonization. What do native people, native animals, and native plants all have in common? We've all been impacted by colonization, and that doesn't get said enough. Let's go back to the foundation of this country, just briefly, because there's a lot to unpack, and we're just going to focus on some key points. Today, many settlers hold this idea they built America, but that couldn't be further from the truth. When they first arrived, they didn't know how to survive on foreign land. Tribes like the Wampanoag taught them how to live off the land, how to farm, fish, and endure the seasons. But that generosity was soon met with violence. After the death of early separatist leaders who maintained alliance with native people, new arrivals brought rigid, fanatical religious views that left no room for peace. To them, indigenous people were other. Wild, savage, godless beings who needed to be controlled or eliminated. Forced conversion to Christianity, cultural erasure, and eventually genocide were all justified by that worldview. The combination of capital greed and their beliefs became enough incentive to violently remove native people from our homelands. But it didn't stop there. Those same settler systems that displaced indigenous people also displaced the animal nations we lived alongside. Colonization treated land as something to be claimed, divided, fenced, and exploited. And that mindset was forced onto wildlife. Animals that once roamed freely, coyotes, raccoons, bears, wolves, were redefined as pests, vermin, or game. They were pushed out, hunted, fenced in, or managed under settler control. And at the same time, a dangerous double standard emerged. Dogs and cats welcomed in the home. Raccoons and coyotes labeled as threats. Wildlife only valued if they stay out of sight or end up in a zoo, cage, or trophy photo. This separation wasn't natural. It was imposed through bullets, bulldozers, poison, and policy. The idea that humans and wildlife must remain separate isn't rooted in ecology. It's rooted in colonial fear. Fear of wildness, fear of relationship, fear of indigenous worldviews that animals are king, not resources.
As tribal people living on the remnant of our homelands, our connection to our past, our connection to our culture really rests in the fact that wild animals are still here, that we can use them for subsistence, that we can use them for cultural connection, that we need to have them here to have a healthy ecosystem and environment.
When a coyote is killed for crossing a fence, when a raccoon is punished for simply being hungry, that's not wildlife management. That's colonization continuing its legacy, enforcing borders that never belonged. Before colonization, humans and wild animals, even predators, coexisted in balance. They left one another alone as long as natural resources like food and habitat remained intact. This coexistence reflected an ancient understanding of respect, boundaries, and interdependence. But colonization, overdevelopment, and the erasure of indigenous land stewardship fractured that balance, displacing ecosystems and displacing entire species. The result? Widespread imbalance that affects us all. Wildlife are not the problem. It's human behavior, especially settler systems rooted in control and separation.
You wish dragons to live free among us, like equals? A toxic notion, my boy. History has shown that we are the superior species. What if word of your misguided ideas were to spread? It would be the undoing of civilization as we know it.
That must be unlearned. Modern conservation often centers on managing animals rather than relating to them. Because once you're in relationship with something, you can't exploit it. So the first step of extraction is always alienation. Once animals are seen as separate, settler systems can kill without guilt, It's just a nuance. Profit without consent. It's just game or fur. Manage without accountability. It's for science. That's the same logic used to justify taking indigenous lands. Disconnect it from its story. Declare it empty or unclaimed. Then claim the right to control it. Wildlife are treated the same. Once severed from kingship, animals become objects, not relatives. So when you see a coyote as king, what does that say about the fence? About the laws that punish that relationship? Settler systems fear connection because connection brings responsibility. If you love a raccoon, grieve for a deer, defend a snake, you're stepping outside colonial logic. That's why animals that become too comfortable near humans are often killed. Not because they're dangerous, but because they challenge the belief that wildness must be separate. That's threatening to a system built on isolation, ownership, and control. But many indigenous people know there's another way. We recognize our animal relatives have instincts, roles, and intelligence of their own. They don't need to be fixed. They need to be respected. Our ancestral relationship with animals and land were so powerful, settler systems had to erase them. So they criminalized our care and replaced it with management. To many indigenous nations, animals are relatives and co-governors, not resources. Feeding, raising, and coexistence with animals wasn't rare. It was normal. We hunted with ceremony, protected habitats, and knew when to act or step back. But those practices were deliberately undermined. Indigenous feeding, habituation, indigenous healing, unlicensed rehab, indigenous hunting, poaching. Today, those same colonial mindsets persist in wildlife laws, zoning codes, and even within conservation nonprofits that claim to protect animals, but only on their terms. It shows up how animals are exploited for profit, fear, entertainment, or ego, with no regard of their role in the ecosystem. Take phrases like, "They've invaded your home," "They're causing damage," "They weren't invited." These are slogans of wildlife removal services, whose fees often start at $800. If babies are involved, it costs more. Many separate mothers from their young, knowing full well they were in your attic to nest. And some euthanize animals after promising safe relocation. That's colonial profit mindset at work. And if we're talking invasive species, let's be real. One of the most destructive is settler colonialism. It brought invasive behaviors and systems that displaced native people, plants, and animals. Settlers often justify the introduction of non-native species with excuses such as agriculture, sports, aesthetics, convenience. But the truth is, those choices broke food chains, destabilized ecosystems, and caused harm we're still dealing with today. So what did rehabilitation look like before colonization? Indigenous oral stories, knowledge, and cultural practices show we've always practiced healing. Rehabilitation for both people and animals existed long before colonization. It wasn't clinical or isolated. Our ancestors had systems of medicine, spiritual care, and reciprocal relationships with the land and animals. Let's not forget the white savior myth, the lie that they saved us. They didn't. They disrupted our ecosystems. They endangered our animal king through overhunting, poisoned water, clear-cut forests, and the exotic pet trade, which still exists today. And here's what continues to hurt us. Americans benefiting from ideas rooted in indigenous knowledge, while we're still fighting to be heard, still watching our lands and animals be taken, still being denied our rights to care for them. We've always been the frontline protectors for the land, the animals, the water, the balance, because protecting one means protecting them all. Raccoons, coyotes, and other native species aren't invading anything. They're surviving. They're adapting in a world where their homes have been replaced with roads, strip malls, and subdivisions. What settlers call invasion, we call displacement. And calling native animals uninvited on stolen land? That's ironic. They've been here longer than roads, fences, and attics. They belong. So ask yourself, what causes more harm? A raccoon nesting in your attic? Or centuries of deforestation, overdevelopment, and pollution for profit? We need to shift our mindset. I'm reminded of the film How to Train Your Dragon. The story starts in a village that sees dragons as pests, dangerous creatures to be hunted and feared. But one boy, Hiccup, has the courage to follow his heart. Instead of killing Toothless, the dragon he trapped, he takes the time to observe him. He studies his behaviors, learns his needs, and over time, they form a bond. That's science, and that's compassion. And through that act, Hiccup uncovered a truth. Everything his people thought they knew about dragons was wrong. By the end of the film, his bravery and compassion changed the entire village. They go from fearing dragons to embracing them. Now, while I don't personally agree with the idea of making wild animals into pets, because these beings are our relatives, not our possessions, but the underlying message is powerful. Understanding can replace fear, and coexistence is possible. One scene that stood out to me is when Hiccup's father defends their fear by saying dragons killed hundreds of their people. And Hiccup replies that humans killed thousands of dragons. His father even blames the dragons for taking his wife. And still, Hiccup chooses compassion. He acknowledges that they're simply living in the dragon's home and eating their food. He chooses empathy over revenge. And that hit home for me. Earlier this year, my daughter's cat was hit by a car. I was hurt. I was upset. But should I hate all humans for that? Of course not. And yet, that's the same logic that some settlers use to justify their hatred of coyotes and raccoons for killing a chicken or a kitten. They don't stop to question why it happened. These animals are not malicious. They're surviving. They're adapting to a world that's displaced them. The real issue isn't the animal. It's settler colonialism, the refusal to acknowledge that we are the ones trespassing on their homes. We have no right to hate a being for doing what it must to live. That reaction, control it, kill it, dominate it. That's the colonial mindset. It hurts to lose something you love, trust, I know. We cannot let grief turn into justification for continuing cycles of harm. That's what Hiccup showed us, that there's another way. One built on observation, courage, and care. In Indigenous worldviews, raccoons and all native animals aren't pests. They're survivors. They're our relatives. Colonial systems taught us to fear and dominate. But we can choose differently. Wildlife isn't invading. Settler colonialism is. But there is hope. Many tribal nations are beginning to get land back. And now, more than ever, people are looking to Indigenous knowledge to address today's ecological crisis. Our traditional knowledge, once dismissed, is finally being seen as what it truly is. Science, rooted in generations of relationship, observation, and care. We're supposed to be in a nation-to-nation relationship. Native people should absolutely have the right to practice our culture, including our role in caring for animals without asking permission. What is this? This is Mother Earth calling her original caretakers back home. So, what can we do now? Land back. Return land to the caretakers who know how to protect it. This isn't about credit. It's about survival. The animals need us. The land needs us. And we need them. We are not new to this. We have always been stewards. It's time to reclaim that role. We need Indigenous leadership guiding policy change, building wildlife crossings, restoring habitat, and challenging outdated systems. When we feed, protect, and grieve with these animals, we're restoring relationships that colonization tried to erase. We don't need separation. We need connection as relatives, not rivals. How to Train Your Dragon may be fictional, but it holds a real truth. Mindsets can change. And with compassion, even generations of harm can begin to heal. So, to my fellow Indigenous people, especially those reconnecting, your presence is powerful. Your care is sacred. Your return is necessary. To our allies, if you say you care about the earth, make space for Indigenous leadership. Don't just borrow our ways. Stand beside us, support us, and listen, because healing the land means bringing Indigenous people back home. Humans, animals, all our relations. So, before I wrap up, I would like to mention I'm currently building a native-led wildlife sanctuary and education center, and I could use your help. Your donations will help with sustainable livelihood, building enclosures, nonprofit status, food, and supplies. You can also volunteer. I could use the extra help like building enclosures and basic work like cleaning. And let's remember what this is about. It's about Indigenous sovereignty. It's about culture revitalization. It's about protecting our animal relatives because our way of life has always been rooted in reciprocity, care, and kinship. All right, everyone. Chikoitesia. Thank you.
I hope you know I never wanna see you go. I hope you know you've always been the one. I hope you know I'll never break your heart in two. I hope you know there's no one else like you.